December 23, 1993. Michael Jackson was standing on the edge of Santa Monica Pier at 2 a.m., about to make the worst decision of his entire life. The allegations, the pain, the betrayal, everything had pushed the king of pop to his breaking point. But then a homeless stranger grabbed his arm and said 5 words that changed everything. "Your music saved my daughter." What happened next became the most powerful 48 hours in Michael Jackson's life, and it all started with a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The winter of 1993 had been the darkest period of Michael Jackson's life. The allegations that summer had torn his world apart, friends had abandoned him, and the media circus never stopped. Every headline felt like a knife twisting deeper into his soul. Monster, freak, fallen king, the words echoed in his mind as he stood there in the December cold, waves crashing below the pier. Michael had dismissed his security team hours earlier. He needed to be alone, to think, to decide if any of this was worth continuing. The wooden railing felt rough beneath his gloved hands as he gripped it tighter, staring down at the dark Pacific Ocean below. 25 years of giving everything to the world, and this was how it ended. But here's what nobody knew about that night. As Michael stood there contemplating his final decision, a weathered hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder. "Hey, you okay there, son?" The voice was gravelly, worn by years of hardship, but somehow gentle. Michael turned to see a man in his 50s, clearly homeless, wearing layers of tattered clothing and carrying everything he owned in a shopping cart. "I'm fine," Michael whispered, pulling his hood tighter around his face, hoping not to be recognized. The homeless man studied him carefully. "No, you ain't. I seen that look before. Had it myself plenty of times." He moved closer to the railing, standing beside Michael. "Name's Thomas. Thomas Mitchell." Michael remained silent, but something about this stranger's presence felt different from everyone else who had approached him in recent months. There was no agenda here, no camera phones, no demands, just genuine human concern. "You know," Thomas continued, gazing out at the ocean, "3 years ago, I was standing right here, same spot, same thoughts. Had nothing left. Lost my job, lost my house, lost—" His voice cracked slightly, "lost my little girl." Despite himself, Michael found his attention pulled from his own pain to this stranger's story. "But then something stopped me," Thomas said. "Want to know what it was?" Michael finally looked at him directly. Even in the dim pier lighting, something in Thomas's eyes reminded him of why he'd always connected with people who were hurting. "Your music," Thomas said simply. "Specifically, Heal the World." Those 3 words hit Michael like a physical blow. Of all the songs, of all the possible connections, this stranger was talking about the song that meant more to Michael than perhaps any other he'd ever written. "See, my daughter Sarah," Thomas continued, reaching into his worn jacket and pulling out a crumpled photo. "She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 8 years old. Doctors gave her maybe 6 months. Michael looked at the photo, a beautiful little girl with bright eyes and a huge smile, wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown, but somehow radiating pure joy. Now, Sarah was always a happy kid, but when she got sick, she got scared, real scared. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, just lay in that hospital bed crying. The doctors said her spirit was broken, and that was going to kill her faster than the cancer." Thomas's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Then one day, a volunteer at Children's Hospital Los Angeles played your song for her. Heal the World. I'll never forget what happened next." Michael felt tears beginning to form in his eyes, though he couldn't yet understand why. Sarah sat up in that bed for the first time in weeks, started moving her hands like she was conducting an orchestra. And she said, "Daddy, this man understands. He knows how to make the hurt go away." The words cut through Michael's despair like a ray of light piercing storm clouds. "But wait, this gets even more incredible." From that day forward, Thomas continued, Sarah played that song every single morning when she woke up, and every night before bed. She'd sing along even when the chemo made her so weak she could barely whisper. "Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me, and the entire human race." Michael was now crying openly, the first genuine tears he'd shed in months that weren't born from self-pity or anger. The doctors couldn't believe it. Her attitude changed everything. She started responding to treatment, started eating again, started laughing. "Your music, man, it literally brought my baby back from the edge of death."
What happened to her?
Michael asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Thomas smiled, and for a moment his weathered face transformed into something beautiful. "She lived. Against all odds, she beat that cancer, lived for 3 more beautiful years, got to be a normal kid again, go to school, play with friends, sing your songs." Michael felt a strange mixture of joy and impending sorrow. the way Thomas spoke about Sarah. She passed away peacefully in 1991. Thomas said gently, "But those 3 years, man, those were the most precious 3 years of my entire life, and we had them because of you." The full weight of this revelation began to settle over Michael. Here was a man who had lost everything: his job, his home, his daughter, and instead of being bitter about his own circumstances, he was trying to save Michael from making an irreversible mistake. After Sarah died, Thomas continued, "I fell apart, lost my job because I couldn't function, couldn't pay rent, ended up here, on these streets. And yeah, I thought about ending it all, but every time I got close to that edge, I'd remember something Sarah said to me right before she died." Michael waited, knowing that whatever came next would change him. She said, "Daddy, promise me you'll keep living, because if you don't, then the man who saved me with his music won't know that his song worked, and he needs to know that what he does matters." Those words hit Michael with the force of a tsunami. "So I've been living, barely, but living, homeless, hungry, forgotten by the world, but alive, because my little girl made me promise to stay alive long enough to thank the man whose music gave us 3 more years together." Thomas turned to face Michael directly. "I don't know who you are under that hood, son, but I can tell you're hurting real bad, and I can tell you're thinking about giving up. But let me tell you something. Whatever you're going through, whatever people are saying about you, there's somebody out there who needs what you have to give. There's some little girl in a hospital bed right now who needs to hear that she's not alone." Michael pulled back his hood, revealing his face to Thomas for the first time. Thomas's eyes widened in recognition. "My God, you're him. You're actually him." "Yeah," Michael whispered. "I'm him." Thomas began to cry. "Sarah would have been so proud. She always said she was going to meet you someday and thank you herself." What happened next became the most important conversation of Michael Jackson's life. The two men talked until sunrise. Michael learned that Thomas was a Vietnam veteran who had worked as a mechanic until Sarah's medical bills bankrupted him. He learned that Thomas carried that photo of Sarah everywhere, and that he'd been living on the streets for 2 years, but had never once asked anyone for money. He survived by collecting recyclables and doing odd jobs. More importantly, Michael learned what his music actually meant to people. Not the charts, not the sales figures, not the awards, but the real human impact on individual lives. "You know what the crazy part is?" Thomas said as the sun began to rise over the Pacific. "Sarah used to say she wanted to be a singer like you when she grew up. She'd perform Heal the World for the other kids in the cancer ward. The nurses told me that on days when Sarah sang, the whole wing was happier. Kids who hadn't smiled in weeks would start singing along." Michael thought about this. One little girl, inspired by his music, had become a source of healing for other sick children. The ripple effect of that single song had spread far beyond anything he could have imagined. "Thomas," Michael said as they watched the sunrise, "I want to tell you something. I wrote Heal the World in 1991, right around the time Sarah was getting sick. I was going through some dark times myself, and I kept thinking about children suffering around the world. I wanted to write something that would give them hope." Thomas nodded, hanging on every word. "When I was writing it, I had this image in my mind of a little girl in a hospital, and I wondered if music could actually help heal her spirit if not her body. I never knew if that was possible, but Sarah proved it was." "She sure did," Thomas said proudly. But here's the part of this story that will absolutely blow your mind. Michael spent the next 48 hours with Thomas, not as the king of pop, not as a celebrity doing charity work, but as one human being connecting with another. They talked about fatherhood, about loss, about the weight of responsibility, and about finding purpose in pain. During those 2 days, Michael made several life-changing decisions. First, he would not give up. Sarah's story had reminded him why he started making music in the first place. Not for fame or money, but to touch people's lives. Second, he would find a way to help Thomas without taking away the man's dignity. Through quiet, anonymous channels, Michael arranged for Thomas to receive veteran benefits he'd never known he was entitled to, helped him find permanent housing, and created a small foundation that provided support for homeless veterans. But most importantly, Michael found his purpose again. "You know what I'm going to do, Thomas?" Michael said on their final morning together. "I'm going to keep making music. But from now on, every time I step into a recording studio, I'm going to think about Sarah. I'm going to remember that somewhere out there might be a little kid who needs to hear that they're not alone." Thomas smiled. "She'd like that. She'd like that a lot." The changes in Michael Jackson after those 48 hours were remarkable. Friends and family noticed that something fundamental had shifted in him. The depression that had consumed him began to lift. he started working on new music with a renewed sense of purpose. But here's what nobody knew at the time. Michael kept in touch with Thomas for the rest of his life. Every month he would meet with Thomas at a small diner in Santa Monica. No cameras, no publicity, just two friends talking about life. Thomas became Michael's unofficial advisor, the person who kept him grounded and reminded him of what really mattered. In 1995, when Michael released Earth Song, he dedicated it privately to Sarah Mitchell, though he never publicly explained the dedication. The song's message about healing the world and caring for children was directly inspired by Sarah's story and her father's devotion. When Michael died in 2009, Thomas Mitchell was one of the first people to arrive at UCLA Medical Center. He stood outside holding Sarah's photo and quietly sang, "Heal the World," as news crews surrounded the hospital. "He saved my daughter's life," Thomas told a reporter, who noticed the elderly man singing. "And my daughter saved his life. That's how healing works. It goes both ways." Today, Thomas Mitchell is 81 years old and lives in a modest apartment in Santa Monica, not far from that pier where he and Michael met. The walls of his home are covered with photos of Sarah and newspaper clippings about Michael's charitable work with children. On his kitchen table sits a framed letter that Michael wrote to him in 2009, just weeks before his death. "Dear Thomas, Sarah's spirit lives on in every song I sing and every child I try to help. She taught me that music isn't about entertaining people, it's about healing them. Thank you for saving my life that night on the pier. Thank you for trusting me with Sarah's story. I carry her with me every day. Love, Michael." Every December 23rd, Thomas returns to Santa Monica Pier at 2 a.m. He stands at the same spot where he met Michael, looks out at the ocean, and thanks his daughter for keeping her promise. Sarah had said that Michael needed to know his music mattered. Mission accomplished. The foundation that Michael quietly established for homeless veterans has now helped over 3,000 people find housing and support. It operates under the name Sarah's Promise Foundation, though few people understand the significance of that name. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is what happened to heal the world after Michael learned about Sarah. The song became the centerpiece of Michael's Heal the World Foundation, which provided support to children around the globe. But Michael also arranged for copies of the song to be distributed to children's hospitals worldwide, free of charge, along with a simple note, "For children who need to know they're not alone." Since 1994, Heal the World has been played in over 500 children's hospitals across 40 countries. Music therapists report that the song has become one of the most requested pieces for young patients dealing with serious illnesses. Dr. Patricia Chen, a pediatric oncologist at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, the same hospital where Sarah Mitchell was treated, estimates that she's seen hundreds of children find comfort and strength in Michael's music over the past 3 decades. "There's something about that particular song," Dr. Chen explains. "It doesn't talk down to children or pretend their problems aren't real. Instead, it acknowledges that the world needs healing and suggests that they can be part of making it better. For sick children who often feel powerless, that message is incredibly empowering." The ripple effect of Sarah's story continues today. Many of the children who found healing through Michael's music during their own hospital stays have grown up to become doctors, nurses, teachers, and counselors themselves, people dedicated to healing others. Michael Jackson once said in an interview, "The greatest education in the world is watching the masters at work." Thomas Mitchell taught Michael what it meant to be a master of love, resilience, and selfless devotion. Sarah Mitchell taught him what it meant to find joy and purpose even in the darkest circumstances. On that pier in December 1993, Michael Jackson was saved by a homeless man who had every reason to be bitter, angry, and focused on his own problems. Instead, Thomas Mitchell chose to use his pain to prevent someone else's pain. He chose to share his daughter's story not for recognition or reward, but because he understood that healing is something we do for each other. The man who saved Michael Jackson's life that night wasn't a doctor, a therapist, or a spiritual leader. He was a broken father carrying a photo of his dead daughter, living on the streets, forgotten by society. But he had something more powerful than money, fame, or professional credentials. He had a story of love that transcended loss. Michael Jackson went on to live for 16 more years after that night. He created more music, helped more children, and touched millions more lives. Every song he sang, every child he helped, every moment of joy he created can be traced back to a homeless man named Thomas Mitchell, who grabbed his arm on a pier and said, "Your music saved my daughter." Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the person who needs saving themselves. And sometimes the most powerful medicine in the world is simply knowing that your pain has served a purpose, that your art has mattered, and that somewhere in the darkness, someone else found light because of something you created. Michael Jackson was the king of pop, but on December 23, 1993, he was saved by something far more powerful than royalty. He was saved by the love between a father and daughter, by the ripple effects of compassion, and by the reminder that his music had always been about healing the world, one heart at a time. The homeless man who saved Michael Jackson's life didn't save him with money, fame, or professional intervention. He saved him with truth, with story, and with the simple but revolutionary idea that we are all connected by the healing power of love. That's not just a rescue story, that's a redemption story. That's proof that sometimes the person who seems to have nothing has everything that matters. And sometimes, saving someone else's life starts with sharing the story of how your own life was saved.